in real estate sales, and I wanted to break down exactly how a sale happens and what goes into it versus just walking into a company or receiving some sort of a lead and explaining what the process actually looks like and how it unfolds. So a little bit of history on me. I actually have my wife here today, so you want to see her in the white dress, right? Thanks, Gil. But this is my family. I mean, everybody has to have a driver, because if you don't have some sort of a driver, what's pulling you to actually excel? And when you think about excelling and motivation, what in that is actually making you want to do what's harder than necessary? Because in order to be top of your field, you're going to have to do things that are harder than what is required of you if you want to challenge yourself to be in the top 1% of what you do. So I learned basically by watching my father work. My dad was just a grinder. He was gone from 5:30 in the morning till about 11 at night. And when I grew up in Canada, in Montreal, my dad was actually gone Monday to Thursday out of town, so I didn't even get to see my dad. And a lot of those things kind of just stuck with me. They were my impression of what it takes to work. And then he grew up in an era where he didn't really nurture me, he acted as a competitor. My dad's 84 years old, so he grew up just post-recession era. And so there was a lot of things going on that as children we get influenced by. And the reason I'm telling you that right now is because we all have things internally that we're influenced by or that hold us back. So I started door knocking at the age of 10, and I thought it was normal because to hang out with my dad I had to work. I started selling newspapers, I'd bust into apartment buildings, knock on all the doors, and so I learned early on just how to talk to people and not be afraid because it was required of me if, again, I wanted to spend time with my dad. So again, whatever your internal dialogue is, I'm going to just ask you to reflect back while we're talking about this on what goes on in your head that allows you to either grow, stunt your growth, things that you really have to pay attention to move through, because all of us have a history, right? This is just my history on paper, but all of those headers actually have a story behind them and what they did in failure, in successes, and everything that we look back on that actually builds a story for us. I started in real estate at 23, and the reason I actually went into real estate is because my dad offered me to take over his company, and I said no way. I said no way because of the impression that my dad had left on me when I was growing up, which was he was my competitor, meaning I would never have the ability to just be the owner of a company. I would be under his thumb. And that actually stunted my own personal sales growth for a long, long time. But just so you also understand, the things that helped me figure this stuff out along the way was I've made over 100,000 phone calls. The past 2 days I've made hundreds of phone calls. I've helped thousands of families buy and sell property. So you start to get this unique understanding of what it takes to connect, how you take a stranger, and that stranger now becomes somebody that's part of your life. And one of the things that I tell people is I have a really bad habit of becoming great friends with the people that I work with. And I tell them that because we all start off as strangers, but how do we develop these relationships? Because I don't know how many of you actually have most of your business by referral, but most of my business at this point comes from referral. And that's because of the impression that you lay on people when you go through a selling experience with them that is not a selling experience anymore because you've shifted it. And that's the biggest part that I want to talk about. So my dad did teach me two things that I really had to drive home in my own head and come to my own understanding of what do they mean. The sky's the limit. He always would say that, and I didn't understand what that meant. What are you talking about, sky's the limit? Why sky's the limit? But then when you start to deconstruct everything and build it back up for what it really means, you just have exponential ability to do anything. And until I started finding my own ability to sell and connect with people, because it took me a long time to get out from under my dad's thumb. And he's not a bad person. I love my dad to death, but the impression he left on me when I was growing up was I wasn't good enough. No matter what I did, I wasn't good enough. And then the other thing that he taught me was you go out every day like you're broke. So it didn't matter what I had achieved in any specific day. When I first started in my real estate career, my dad would open up his blazer and pull out 5 contracts, and he would say, "What did you do today?" And that is what left an impression on me. So everybody has a story. And that story is what we reflect on every day. Whether it's going to take us to mediocre, whether it's going to take us to exceptional, or through necessity, we have to find a way to break through it and then make sure it's not just a scarcity mindset that's taking us to exceptional ability, taking that to being number one in your field or top 5% in your field. Because anything that's going to separate you from the rest of the 95%, because in my experience, I don't care what industry it is, there's only 5% of the business that's really being done by, 95% of the business is being done by 5% of the people in a field. And if you look at it, you can just break it down. Why are there famous people in the world in any particular industry, and then there's everybody else that wants to be, right? If you think about it, it's just that mindset. So I wanted to challenge you, I want to make this interactive. Now, I'm in real estate. I also own part of a technology company that's based here in WeWork. And depending on if you were in your particular field starting out, or even where you are now, how many of you would feel comfortable going into a multi-million-dollar sale? For me, that would be like a $10 or $20 million listing. So just by a show of hands, because I really do want you to interact with me, because this is important. This is going to get you driven into this presentation, which if you're just here to watch, you're not going to learn. If you participate with me, you're going to learn. So how many of you are ready to go into a multi-million-dollar sales presentation? Awesome. Almost half the room. There's a maybe over there, right? Now let me ask you this. How many of you would be able to sell your least expensive service, no problem? It's just like somebody walked into the office and said, I want that. How many of you could do that, right? And the reason I ask you to do that is because where's the disconnect, right? That's me just going, what the heck, right? But where is the disconnect? And those are the most important things to always be aware of. Because if you're in that space in your own brain that you're petrified to walk in, your mouth starts to dry up, you start to get clammy, your brain goes into lizard mode, and you just want to survive that experience. What have you done? What have you done to yourself, and what have you done to that experience? You've just shut it off. You've literally closed down in that moment where you cannot shine. It's impossible to shine if you have no idea what's disconnecting you or where you're finding your own blockage along the way. So, a big part is the inner game. So before we even go into anything that we do that's sales oriented, what are you doing? What's locked away in your internal vault? What is keeping you safe? What is keeping you secure? What is the defense inside of you that tells you you're not good enough, or they're going to find me, I'm a fraud, I'm all of these things that we play with internally in our own brain? Because that's what happens to all of us. I don't care who you are or what you've done. We will have a moment in our own abilities as we're growing that tells us, I can't do this. They're going to figure me out. There's probably a better competitor over there. I already know that so-and-so company already came over here and gave a presentation. And what have you done? Like literally, what have you done for yourself? You talked yourself out of something. So what are these things that are inside of you so important? I mean, do you really challenge them, or do you face them, and do you think about them, and do you actually be mindful about catching it in that moment where you know you're in there, and then something comes up in your brain that tells you, they're never going to do this. It's impossible. And then you're right. But when do you make yourself vulnerable? And when do you open up that vault? Because part of what I want to talk about and what's helped me in my own success is I've just become vulnerable and humanized my own experiences with the people that I meet. Because when you can come across on a personal level with somebody, that personality that you're going to develop with that person when you get to know them is going to trigger you way past what you ever thought could happen. And that's why I told you initially, I have a bad habit of becoming great friends with the people that I work with. Because everybody's an individual. And who are they? Because really, that's what they want, is a connection. So when we're doing that, you might ask yourself in communication, why am I talking about these things? For what reason is developing a relationship with anyone important? Why? Why would making a relationship with somebody so that you're memorable be important to anybody? How is that meeting, how is that moment, how is that mindset going to determine your future? And you can win or lose, like I mentioned, within that moment of walking in that room, taking that call, on your follow-up. So your mindset really is everything. And my first aha moment was, who are we? One of the cool things, a good friend of mine, Steve, is over here, who's a coach to many really incredible people across the country, and he's really into personality testing. He does the Myers-Briggs just at an exceptional level. I just do the simple DISC because it's a little bit easier, but it gives you an insight as to who you're working with. So how many of you are familiar with personality profiling or any kind of tests? Okay, all of you. So when you take that test, and here's mine, and I'm going to go over who I am in a minute, right? You find out that you're not this unique individual. You're on paper. And when you're on paper, you start to read about, oh, I do function like this. That is me. I do that. And when I first looked at that, I thought, how does somebody know me? But then I took it to a different level. When you're actually in selling, in service, in providing anything that's going to provide a solution to that person, who are they? So that's when I started to differentiate everything. And as I differentiated it, you can see what my personality profile is like. I'm a massive extrovert, so I'm always talking to people, where my wife who's attending, she doesn't want to talk to anybody on the phone. If any solicitor calls, I'll listen to them all the way through. She goes, what are you doing? You're crazy. Because if she gets the call, she just goes, yeah, bye, right? And so we all have this way of showing up. So once you start to understand who are they, how do they show up? Because service is not about you. It's impossible to be about you. If it was just about you, then you'd just be selling something that somebody could click and just buy. Because it didn't even have anything to do about you. It was just something that solved a simple solution. But I'm not an introvert. I don't want tasks. If we go back over here, my C is 25. I lose things when I put them down because I wrote them on a napkin that I wipe my mouth with, right? And then I throw it out. But that's me. So once you get to understand who you are, then you can start to go, who are they? Because I don't know about all of you, but in real estate, with that low of just having the ability to take notes, have everything organized, read through contracts, I don't want to do that. That's not my strength. But when I work with an engineer or a CPA or somebody that is super detail-oriented, that's going to be important to them. And what is that going to do for me if all I focus on is, why don't you just sign the contract? It's going to eliminate me from the running of being able to work with them and take them to the next level, because I didn't pay attention to what was important to them. So personality test is really about you understanding that everybody's unique. And when you can start to figure out how somebody else shows up, then we can start getting into the fun stuff, right? These are different words, and I'm going to send you guys the slide deck after so you get all of this. But this is really interesting so that you can start to pick up on how certain personality types act. I'll wait for Haley to take her picture. But it's not simply about learning about them. Once you start to have those aha moments, then every time you're in these situations, you're going to be able to stop yourself and learn to understand, okay, let me back up. How is this person acting? How are they reacting? What's important to them? What are they doing? Because why is it so important? And I used to have exclamation marks on there because it was so big for me, but Zesty, my assistant, wanted question marks on there because it really is a question. Why is understanding somebody's personality so important? Because, and this I did for my wife because she loves Mary-Kate and Ashley, but you're going to mirror and match somebody. You're going to start to become more like them. If I talk really slowly, it's because they're talking really slowly. If they're talking exceptionally fast like a New Yorker and they're vulgar and they're cursing, they're saying all kinds of shit, I'm going to talk like that. If they're slouched over, I'm going to slouch over. And what's really interesting about mirroring and matching techniques is once you get into a rhythm with somebody, what's absolutely fascinating is now you can start to navigate the physiology. You can put your arm out, they'll put their arm out. You can lean in, they will lean in. And now you know you actually are in rapport. And that's what's fascinating. So I wanted to show you what all of this looks like in my world, because I had to develop what I call an acronym so that I didn't want to work with a script. I wanted to just work with a fluid conversation. And so many people that get tossed into the sales arena have no idea how to have a selling conversation. You get a script, you might get some names, you might have inbound calls or emails, and then how do you respond? In my world, if any of you were looking to buy a house, I would want to know what's your location, what's the price point, have you already been qualified with a mortgage professional, are you paying cash, right? Is there an agent that's helping you? What's your motivation like? Are you owning a house? Are you renting a house? Did your landlord give you notice? So once I've built a story, I can set an appointment based on understanding. But that acronym is simply my framework. And that framework, what goes into it then, while I'm following this roadmap, is I can be fluid. If all of a sudden you wanted to start talking to me about something that took me away from location and price, and you said, my landlord's got my house up for sale, they've already got an offer on it, I have to move in 30 days, I can reverse engineer my conversation because I know where I'm going. Right? So once you have an ability to understand how, what, when, where, why, and what's important in your field, then you'll never miss a beat again. And if you don't have a story, you can't have a sale. And if you don't have a story, you can't find out what's important. And if you can't find out what's important, you can't create a connection. And all of this is being able to